My husband left me for a slick mistress, having absolutely no idea she worked for my multi-million-dollar firm. At least he hadn't officially handed me the divorce papers yet as we sat in the dimly lit, aggressively opulent private dining room of the Capitol Grill. But the way his left hand casually rested high on her thigh underneath the crisp, imported white tablecloth told me the departure was imminent. Liam had insisted on this exclusive family dinner to officially introduce his new PR consultant, Sienna, to his parents, Richard and Patricia, under the guise of celebrating a minor promotion at his mid-level marketing job. Sienna was 28 years old, draped effortlessly in a flawless emerald green silk slip dress, projecting the exact kind of ruthless, high society glamour and youthful energy that Liam was currently so desperately obsessed with. I, on the other hand, was playing my assigned role to absolute perfection, wearing a faded, slightly oversized gray cashmere sweater and a modest, unmemorable pearl necklace, sitting with my shoulders slightly hunched, looking exactly like the exhausted, uninspired, penniless housewife they all deeply believed me to be. Patricia sighed heavily, swirling her $200 glass of vintage Cabernet, looking at me across the table with a gaze full of undisguised pity and sharp maternal disappointment. Honestly, Clara, a little feminine softness and basic effort wouldn't kill you, especially when Liam works his fingers to the bone keeping a roof over your head while you play with your little data entry hobby from the living room couch. Liam smiled a smug, condescending smile, reaching over his perfectly seared ribeye to pat my hand as if I were a particularly slow, fragile child who needed constant reassurance. "She's doing her absolute best, Mom. You know, not everyone is built for high finance stress and corporate maneuvering like Sienna and me. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It always amazes me to see how far these stories travel and how many people connect with them. And tell me if you have ever had to sit silently at a table while the very people you secretly finance openly insult your intelligence and worth." Sienna offered a perfectly rehearsed, sympathetic pout, leaning forward slightly so the dim restaurant lighting caught her cheekbones, her eyes meeting mine across the table with a look of pure, calculated dominance that Liam completely misread as feminine empathy. It must be so difficult, Clara, just being at home all day in the quiet suburbs while Liam is out in the city making real, aggressive moves in the corporate world. I simply nodded meekly, taking a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water, my face a flawless mask of quiet, tragic resignation, while internally, behind my blank eyes, I was meticulously reviewing the encrypted 70-page forensic financial dossier Sienna had securely transmitted to my penthouse office server just 3 hours prior. They had absolutely no idea. Liam genuinely thought he was playing a brilliant high-stakes game of chess, aggressively maneuvering this gorgeous, connected PR executive into his life to elevate his pathetic, stagnant social status, completely blind to the terrifying fact that Sienna Miller was actually my senior forensic investigator. She earned a base salary of $250,000 a year from Apex Resolution Partners, the multi-million-dollar distressed debt acquisition firm I had founded entirely from scratch a decade ago. And I had personally assigned her to audit my husband's catastrophic financial life the exact moment I noticed $80,000 secretly siphoned from our joint investment account. The waiter, a polished, intimidating man in a black vest and silver tie, approached the table carrying a heavy silver tray, placing the black leather billfold discreetly in the dead center of the table. The total was over $1,400, a casual Tuesday night indulgence for people who genuinely believed they were wealthy, but a crippling blow to a family drowning in hidden debt. The table suddenly grew suffocatingly quiet. Richard cleared his throat aggressively and suddenly found the intricate plaster molding on the ceiling fascinating, refusing to look down. Patricia abruptly stopped swirling her wine and began aggressively checking her perfectly manicured nails, waiting for someone else to take the financial hit. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his least luxury chair, hurriedly pulling his hand away from Sienna's thigh to reach for his designer wallet, his face flushing a deep, embarrassing shade of crimson as he mentally calculated that his heavily overextended credit cards were currently hovering dangerously near their absolute maximum limits. "Well," Patricia chirped nervously, breaking the heavy silence and looking pointedly at Liam's younger sister, Rachel, who was busy ignoring the tension by scrolling aggressively through social media on her phone. "Maybe Liam can cover it tonight, considering he just told us he closed that massive new account downtown." Liam swallowed hard, a visible bead of cold sweat forming at his left temple as he pulled out a standard platinum card with trembling fingers. "Actually, Mom, my main corporate card is currently being reissued by the bank due to a fraud alert, so—" He let the pathetic sentence hang in the air, the crushing humiliation of his own manufactured fake wealth creeping into the opulent room like a foul odor. I did not sigh. I did not roll my eyes or offer a condescending smirk. I simply opened my worn, decidedly undesigner, faux leather handbag, reached past my grocery receipts into the hidden, biometric-locked zippered compartment, and smoothly pulled out a solid, matte black titanium American Express Centurion card. I tossed it lightly onto the silver tray. It hit the polished metal with a heavy, distinct, undeniable thud that sounded exactly like a judge's wooden gavel coming down in the silent, tense room. The waiter's eyes went incredibly wide with absolute, unquestioning reverence as he instantly recognized the physical weight and the exclusive matte finish of the metal, immediately scooping it up with a deep, respectful bow and retreating to the register without uttering a single word. Patricia blinked rapidly, leaning forward over her empty plate, her heavily Botoxed brow furrowing in deep, genuine confusion. "Clara, what on earth is that heavy thing? Did Liam give you some sort of special emergency prepaid card for the household?" I looked directly at my mother-in-law, my expression perfectly blank, pleasant, and entirely unreadable. "It's just a new rewards card I applied for, Patricia. I get excellent cash back on my weekly grocery runs at the supermarket." Sienna expertly coughed into her thick linen napkin to mask a completely genuine predatory smile, her eyes sparkling with the secret knowledge of exactly how much capital sat behind that piece of titanium. Liam looked simultaneously overwhelmingly relieved that he didn't have to face the humiliation of a declined card in front of his new mistress, and deeply, aggressively suspicious, his fragile, inflated ego instantly bruised by the baffling fact that his plain data entry wife had just casually dropped a piece of plastic that commanded more immediate respect from the elite waitstaff than his entire fabricated persona ever could. "You really shouldn't be so irresponsible and flashy with new credit lines, Clara," Liam scolded weakly, puffing out his chest and desperately trying to regain his dominant footing and project financial authority in front of his mistress and his parents. "I'll have to sit down and review this statement with you next month to make sure you aren't irresponsibly digging us into a financial hole we can't get out of." I gave him a soft, obedient, perfectly submissive nod, adjusting my cheap pearl necklace. "Of course, Liam, you're right. You always know what is best for our finances." As the waiter returned with the long, printed receipt, deliberately bypassing Liam entirely and handing the silver tray directly to me with a look of profound, silent respect, I signed my name with a cheap plastic ballpoint pen I pulled from my purse. As the ink dried on the paper, I found immense, quiet comfort in the knowledge that in exactly 48 hours, the risky secondary commercial mortgage Liam had secretly taken out on his parents' beloved, historic family estate to blindly fund Sienna's fake PR retainer would officially default. My anonymous holding company, operating through 3 layers of Delaware LLCs, was already perfectly positioned and legally authorized to buy that distressed asset from the bank for literal pennies on the dollar. I let them drink my expensive wine. I let them eat my prime, dry-aged food. I let them bask in the arrogant, hollow delusion of their own inherent superiority. I endured the disrespect because I knew a fundamental truth about human nature. Unchecked greed makes people incredibly, fatally sloppy, and mathematics, unlike my cheating, soon-to-be ex-husband, never, ever lies. We walked out of the restaurant into the crisp evening air, the valet immediately rushing to pull Liam's leased BMW 5 Series to the curb, while I stood quietly to the side, waiting for my 10-year-old Honda Accord to be driven up from the absolute back of the lot. Patricia hugged Liam tightly, kissing his cheek and completely ignoring me before turning to Sienna and gripping her hands warmly. "It was so wonderful to meet you, Sienna. Liam needs more driven, ambitious people like you in his professional circle." Richard shook Liam's hand, slapping him on the back with paternal pride. "Keep climbing, son." Liam puffed out his chest, looking like a king surveying his loyal subjects before turning to me with a sharp, impatient gesture. "Clara, my car is here. I need to get moving. I have a late strategy meeting with Sienna to go over the new campaign metrics, so you just drive straight home and I'll see you later tonight." I nodded calmly, wrapping my oversized sweater tighter around my shoulders against the wind. "Have a productive meeting, Liam. Drive safe." He didn't even look back as he opened the passenger door for Sienna, gently guiding her into the leather seat with a level of tender care he hadn't shown me in 5 years, before slipping behind the wheel and speeding off into the city night. I tipped the valet a crisp $100 bill, ignoring his shocked expression, and climbed into my humble sedan, the interior smelling faintly of vanilla air freshener and old fabric. The drive back to our modest suburban house took exactly 45 minutes, a quiet, meditative journey where I let the agonizing facade of the clueless, subservient wife slowly melt away, layer by agonizing layer, until only the cold, calculating architect remained. When I finally pulled into the empty driveway, the house was dark and perfectly silent, a sterile monument to a marriage that had died a slow, unmourned death years ago. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and immediately bypassed the living room, walking straight down the hallway to the master bedroom. I stripped off the itchy cashmere sweater, the cheap pearls, and the ill-fitting slacks, leaving them in a careless pile on the floor, and changed into a sleek, tailored black silk loungewear set. I walked into Liam's meticulously organized walk-in closet, pushed aside a row of his expensive dry-cleaned suits, and pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner embedded flawlessly into the custom oak paneling. The heavy, reinforced steel security door clicked open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow staircase that led down to a soundproofed, climate-controlled sub-basement Liam didn't even know existed. This was my true sanctuary, a state-of-the-art command center lined with 6 high-definition curved monitors, encrypted server racks humming quietly in the corner, and a massive glass whiteboard covered in complex financial flow charts and corporate restructuring diagrams. I sat down in my ergonomic leather executive chair, feeling the familiar comforting hum of power course through me, and immediately booted up the primary workstation. The screens flickered to life, bathing the dark room in a cold blue glow, displaying real-time market data, global asset trackers, and the dedicated, highly secure internal network of Apex resolution partners. I opened the encrypted folder labeled Project Icarus, the code name for Liam's catastrophic financial audit. The first document was a high-resolution scan of a commercial loan agreement, bearing a signature that looked incredibly similar to mine, but upon microscopic forensic analysis lacked the distinct pressure points and fluid loops of my genuine handwriting. Liam had actually forged my name, risking 20 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and identity theft, just to secure a $150,000 line of credit to impress a woman he thought was a shallow PR girl. Suddenly, a secure, heavily encrypted incoming video call notification flashed urgently across the center monitor. I clicked accept, and the screen instantly filled with Sienna's face. She was sitting in the passenger seat of Liam's BMW, the city lights reflecting off the window behind her, but her demeanor had completely, drastically shifted. The giggling, flirty mistress from the steakhouse was entirely gone, replaced by the sharp, unsmiling, coldly efficient senior forensic auditor who was arguably the most lethal weapon in my entire corporate arsenal. "Target is fully in the trap, boss," Sienna reported, her voice completely stripped of the high-pitched, girlish tone she used with Liam, now calm, professional, and razor-sharp. "He believes I'm completely, hopelessly, mesmerized by his supposed wealth and his grand vision for the future. We are currently parked outside my apartment building, and he just explicitly offered to sign the Delaware LLC holding assets over to my name to legally hide them from the IRS, using his parents' historic mansion as the primary collateral for the transfer." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the digital web of lies my husband had woven, feeling a profound, chilling sense of peace settle over my entire body. "Excellent work, Sienna. Your performance at dinner was flawless." I typed a rapid command into the terminal, initiating the automated purchase order on the secondary debt market. "Trigger the personal liability and acceleration clause in his loan contract immediately. Let him swallow the hook completely. I want his entire financial existence locked down by sunrise." Sienna nodded once, the glowing screen illuminating the sharp, calculating angles of her face as she reached toward her dashboard to end the encrypted transmission. "Understood, boss. The paperwork for the LLC asset transfer is already drafted and sitting in his inbox, masked as a standard vendor agreement, and the moment he signs it tomorrow morning, he legally ties his own neck to the federal fraud charges without any escape route." The screen went black, leaving me sitting in the quiet hum of my subterranean server room, the cool blue light casting long shadows against the reinforced steel walls, as I watched the digital progress bars lock his financial doom into place. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant adrenaline or the fiery, chaotic joy of petty revenge. I only felt the cold, heavy, methodical satisfaction of a surgeon successfully amputating a gangrenous limb to save the rest of the body. For 5 years, I had allowed Liam Cole to feed off my energy, my capital, and my silence, convincing myself that a marriage required endless, unconditional sacrifice from the woman, even when the man brought absolutely nothing to the table but complaints and entitlement. I powered down the primary monitors, ensuring the biometric locks were engaged, and silently climbed the narrow staircase back into the master bedroom, where the air felt stale and heavy with the ghost of a dead relationship. I slipped into the cold bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, listening to the distant, muffled sound of Liam's leased BMW finally pulling into the driveway 3 hours later, the heavy thud of the front door echoing through the quiet house like a hollow drum. He didn't come into the bedroom. He went straight to the guest bathroom to shower, a pathetic, transparent attempt to wash off the lingering scent of Sienna's expensive, custom-blended Tom Ford perfume before he had to face his supposedly clueless, plain wife. When morning finally broke, filtering dull, gray light through the cheap blinds I deliberately refused to upgrade, I was already in the kitchen, dressed in another faded, oversized cardigan, dutifully brewing his preferred artisanal dark roast coffee. Liam walked in wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that he had charged to a high-interest credit card, his hair styled flawlessly, looking every bit the aggressive, rising corporate star he so desperately hallucinated himself to be. He didn't say good morning. He simply reached past me, took the mug from my hands without making eye contact, and took a long sip, staring at his phone with a deep, self-important frown. "The bank is still being completely ridiculous about that supposed fraud alert on my platinum card," Liam muttered, his voice dripping with arrogant annoyance as he swiped aggressively at his screen, completely oblivious to the fact that I was the one who had anonymously flagged his account, for suspicious international activity. I'm going to have to spend half my morning yelling at some incompetent customer service rep, which is incredibly frustrating because I have massive, high-level strategy meetings all day with Sienna to finalize the new PR rollout for the firm. I kept my face perfectly neutral, wiping down the marble countertop with slow, deliberate motions, playing the role of the sympathetic, simple-minded domestic partner. That sounds incredibly stressful, Liam. Maybe you should hold off on any big purchases until the bank sorts everything out. He scoffed loudly, a harsh, condescending sound that grated against my spine, setting his coffee mug down with a sharp clack. Clara, please don't try to give me financial advice. You balance a household checkbook. I manage multi-million-dollar corporate narratives. It's an entirely different universe of stress and capital management. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me in the comments if you've ever had a partner or family member completely dismiss your intelligence simply because you chose not to brag about your accomplishments. I simply nodded, looking down at the floor in feigned submission, watching the polished leather of his expensive Italian shoes paid for by a bonus I had secretly orchestrated through a dummy corporation just to keep his fragile ego from shattering 2 years ago. Actually, Liam continued, his tone shifting into something dangerously casual, reaching into his slim leather briefcase and pulling out a stack of dense, legal-sized documents. Since we're talking about finances, I need you to sign these routine tax waivers and power of attorney forms for the joint account. He slid the papers across the kitchen island, tapping the signature lines with his gold-plated pen. It just allows me to streamline our investments and move some liquid assets around without needing to bother you with the complex, boring paperwork every single time the market shifts. I looked down at the documents, instantly recognizing the specific predatory phrasing of a total asset relinquishment clause hidden deep within the third paragraph of the second page. He wasn't trying to streamline our investments. He was legally attempting to drain the last remaining $70,000 from our emergency savings to finalize the down payment on the commercial lease for Sienna's fake PR office. I picked up the gold pen, my hand intentionally trembling just enough to make me look hesitant and intimidated by the legal jargon, and I signed my name on the dotted line. But I didn't use my real, legally binding signature. I used the exact same forged, duress signature I had meticulously practiced, the one with the disconnected loops, the reversed slant, and the deliberate pen lifts that any forensic document examiner in a federal court would instantly identify as a product of coercion or fraud. Liam snatched the papers back the literal second the ink was dry, his chest puffing out with visible relief and unearned victory, quickly stuffing them back into his briefcase as if he had just pulled off the heist of the century. "Good girl," he said, patting my shoulder absently, the ultimate sickening gesture of patronizing disrespect. "I'll see you late tonight, Clara. Don't wait up. I have to take Sienna and some major prospective clients out for a celebratory dinner after we finalize the LLC." He walked out the door without a backward glance, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind him, leaving me standing in the absolute silence of the kitchen. I waited exactly 3 minutes until I heard the engine of his BMW fade down the suburban street, and then the tired, hunched posture of Clara the housewife instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp alignment of my spine. I walked into the garage, bypassed his empty parking spot, and climbed into my 10-year-old Honda Accord, pulling out of the driveway and merging onto the highway heading toward the downtown financial district. The drive was a daily metamorphosis. 40 minutes of transitioning from a woman who was treated like an invisible burden to a woman who commanded an empire. I didn't park in the public lot. I swiped a secure keycard at the heavily guarded entrance of the Apex Tower's private underground garage, pulling into a designated VIP spot next to a row of matte black SUVs. I took the private, biometric-locked executive elevator directly to the penthouse level, the doors sliding open with a soft, expensive whisper to reveal the gleaming, high-tech sanctuary of Apex Resolution Partners. The entire floor was encased in floor-to-ceiling smart glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city's skyline. but my focus was entirely on the people moving efficiently through the open-plan office. The moment I stepped onto the plush carpet, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Conversations lowered respectfully, analysts sat up straighter at their multi-monitor workstations, and the general hum of chaotic corporate energy instantly sharpened into focused, disciplined precision. I walked straight into my private master suite, a massive corner office hidden behind frosted glass, and quickly stripped off the faded suburban cardigan and the shapeless jeans. In the attached executive dressing room, a row of flawlessly tailored, bespoke power suits waited for me like polished armor. I chose a deep, blood-red silk blouse and a sharply tailored obsidian black blazer, slipping on a pair of sleek, intimidating stiletto heels that made a sharp, commanding sound against the hardwood floor. I clasped a heavy, solid gold heirloom watch around my wrist, the cool metal grounding me, and walked back out to my massive mahogany desk, just as Sterling, my brilliant, ruthless 60-year-old general counsel, knocked softly on the glass door. "Come in, Sterling," I said, my voice dropping into its natural, authoritative register, completely devoid of the high-pitched, submissive tone I was forced to use at home. Sterling walked in carrying a single red-tabbed legal folder, his expression grim but deeply satisfied, his sharp eyes reflecting decades of experience in dismantling corrupt corporations and destroying arrogant men. "Good morning, CEO Caldwell," Sterling greeted formally, placing the folder precisely in the center of my desk. "I have the finalized morning reports regarding Project Icarus, and I must say, your husband is moving with a level of financial recklessness that borders on clinical insanity." I opened the folder, my eyes immediately scanning the highlighted figures on the certified bank statements and the secondary market mortgage transfers. "Tell me about the Magnolia estate, Sterling. Did Richard and Patricia's distressed debt clear the final hurdle?" Sterling offered a thin, predatory smile, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "It cleared flawlessly at 8:00 a.m. sharp. Liam's parents had secretly taken out a massive, high-interest second mortgage on their family estate to cover 3 years of unpaid country club dues, luxury car leases, and back taxes they were desperately hiding from their social circle. The regional bank was quietly preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings next week, but our anonymous holding company stepped in and purchased the entire debt portfolio for 40 cents on the dollar. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers, the heavy gold watch catching the morning sunlight pouring through the windows, which means Apex Holdings is now the primary, legally uncontestable lien holder on the property. Sterling nodded slowly, tapping the document. "Exactly. You essentially own the roof over your in-laws' heads, Clara. And because Liam just foolishly used that exact same property as collateral to guarantee the new commercial lease for Sienna's phantom PR firm, he has cross-collateralized a defaulted asset. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it all washed over me, a dark, heavy realization of how completely Liam and his elitist parents had underestimated my intelligence. For years, Patricia had sat at family dinners, swirling her expensive wine, openly mocking my modest clothes and my data entry hobby, boldly claiming that Liam was the only reason I wasn't living in a cardboard box, completely blind to the terrifying reality that I was the invisible architect of their entire, fragile, debt-ridden existence. 7 years ago, when Liam's very first tech startup completely collapsed due to his gross incompetence and obsessive spending on luxury office furniture, I had quietly liquidated a portion of my early investment portfolio to save him from personal bankruptcy. I never told him it was my money. I funneled it through a blind angel investor trust, allowing him to genuinely believe his brilliant pitch had saved the day, simply because I wanted to protect his fragile male pride. And how did he repay that ultimate sacrifice? By slowly convincing himself that he was a self-made genius, by actively belittling the woman who had silently bled to build his foundation, and eventually by attempting to steal my last remaining assets to build a glittering new life with a younger, sharper woman he believed was finally on his elite level. "He just submitted the wire transfer, boss," Sterling said, breaking my deep reflection, looking down at his encrypted tablet as a high-priority alert flashed across the screen in bright red text. "Liam just initiated a wire transfer of $150,000 from the forged commercial loan account directly into Sienna's LLC holding account." A profound, heavy silence filled the executive office as the final fatal piece of the puzzle snapped into place. By moving funds obtained through a forged signature across state lines into a corporate entity, Liam hadn't just made a terrible financial mistake. He had officially committed federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and corporate embezzlement, crimes that carried mandatory, unavoidable minimum sentences in a federal penitentiary. "He just crossed the Rubicon," I murmured softly, my voice completely devoid of pity or hesitation, feeling the final lingering thread of my marital loyalty snap and dissolve into dust. "Contact Special Agent Jamal Washington at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division immediately. Send him the fully unredacted, decrypted dossier on Liam Cole, including the forged signature analysis, the cross-collateralized mortgage defaults, and the real-time IP tracking of the wire transfer." Sterling's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine awe crossing his stoic face as he realized the absolute total annihilation I was unleashing. "Sending the file to the feds means there is no going back, Clara. The moment Jamal Washington opens that encrypted drive, Liam's life as a free man is entirely, permanently over, and his parents will be evicted by federal marshals before the end of the month." I stood up, smoothing the sharp lines of my crimson blazer, walking slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look down at the sprawling city below. A city where my soon-to-be ex-husband was currently sitting in a leased office, smiling at my undercover auditor, genuinely believing he had finally won the ultimate game. "I know exactly what it means, Sterling," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the glass I was touching. "They wanted to treat me like an uneducated, penniless ghost. They wanted to steal my foundation to build their own corrupted castle. It's time to let them experience the terrifying absolute silence of the void they created." Sterling nodded respectfully, tapping the screen of his tablet to initiate the secure federal transfer, the tiny digital lock icon spinning as the damning evidence flew through the ether toward the federal government. "Consider it done, boss. I will also begin drafting the aggressive foreclosure notices for the Magnolia estate." As the door clicked shut behind my general counsel, my personal encrypted cell phone, the one Liam didn't know existed, buzzed violently on my desk, displaying an urgent, panicked text message from an unknown number that I instantly recognized as Richard Cole, my father-in-law. The message read, "Clara, please tell Liam to answer his phone immediately. Something terrible has just happened with the bank and the house. We need his financial help right now." I stared at the glowing screen for a long, quiet moment, feeling the absolute terrifying power of complete control thrumming in my veins. And then I calmly picked up the phone, held my thumb over the power button, and completely shut the device down, plunging the screen into total unforgiving darkness. I placed the silenced, completely darkened phone into the bottom drawer of my massive mahogany desk, turned the small brass key to lock it, and let the profound, heavy silence of my executive office wash over me, completely undisturbed by the manufactured chaos I knew was currently unfolding miles away. The panicked text message from Richard Cole, my arrogant, deeply entitled father-in-law, was not a genuine distress signal I had any intention of answering. It was simply the very first inevitable, satisfying crack in the fragile, aggressively debt-financed dam they had spent decades meticulously building to keep their false, aristocratic reality afloat. For years, I had sat quietly at their perfectly set holiday tables, listening to Richard loudly pontificate about fiscal responsibility and the inherent laziness of the working class, while I secretly knew his entire life was heavily subsidized by predatory loans and my own hidden, uncredited capital injections. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors illuminating my command center, watching the real-time financial data stream across the secure Apex Resolution Partners network, watching the precise mathematical execution of a man who had entirely engineered his own flawless destruction. The biometric lock on my suite's heavy glass door hissed softly, and Sienna strode into the room, having completely shed the emerald green slip dress and the breathy, wide-eyed, submissive persona she had so flawlessly weaponized against my husband the night before. Today she was dressed in a razor-sharp, double-breasted charcoal pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense bun, carrying a heavy encrypted laptop that held the digital ashes of Liam's future. "He's actively spiraling, boss," Sienna reported, her voice brisk, cold, and strictly professional as she placed the laptop on my desk and connected it to the secure internal mainframe. "I have the complete audio and visual recordings of him signing the LLC transfer documents in the coffee shop this morning. And the moment he submitted the forged wire transfer to our holding account, his personal bank initiated a hard, automated freeze on all of his available assets due to the federal flag we placed." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my steepled fingers, feeling a cool, detached sense of clinical observation. "Walk me through the timeline of his panic, Sienna. I want to know exactly how the realization of his poverty is setting in." Sienna pulled up a decrypted timeline on the secondary monitor, displaying a rapid, chaotic cluster of declined transaction alerts and frantic outbound phone calls. It started at exactly 8:45. He tried to use his newly issued corporate card to buy a $7 latte at the artisanal cafe near his office, and the terminal rejected it with a hard code for suspected fraud. He immediately called the bank, assuming it was a simple administrative error, and spent 40 minutes screaming at a Tier 1 customer service representative who was legally prohibited from telling him that his accounts were currently locked under a federal subpoena. I nodded slowly, imagining the deep, humiliating flush of red creeping up Liam's neck as he stood in a crowded line of real corporate executives, desperately trying to project wealth while his plastic was repeatedly declined. "And his parents?" I asked quietly. "Richard texted me 20 minutes ago in a state of absolute hysteria." Sienna's lips curled into a faint, merciless smile as she tapped another file. "The Federal Courier arrived at the Magnolia estate precisely at 9:30 this morning. Because Liam foolishly cross-collateralized his parents' second mortgage to secure the commercial lease for my phantom PR firm, and because Apex Holdings instantly called in the defaulted debt the second he transferred the fraudulent funds. The bank was legally obligated to serve them with an immediate, non-negotiable notice of intent to foreclose and seize the property." The sheer, breathtaking velocity of the trap snapping shut was almost beautiful in its brutal efficiency. Liam had spent his entire life believing he was the smartest man in every room, constantly taking credit for my silent stability. And now he was drowning in a storm entirely of his own arrogant making. "He has called my burner phone 14 times in the last hour," Sienna continued, closing the laptop with a definitive click. "He's desperately trying to reach me to secure the LLC funds, genuinely believing that the $150,000 he wired me this morning is his only remaining lifeline to save his parents' house and finalize his PR empire." I stood up, smoothing the pristine lines of my crimson silk blouse, the heavy gold heirloom watch on my wrist catching the sharp overhead light. "Keep your phone entirely turned off for the rest of the day, Sienna. Let him sit in the agonizing, suffocating vacuum of his own mistakes without any target to project his panic onto." Before I continue, let me know in the comments if you have ever had to watch someone who consistently belittled you suddenly panic when the very safety net they took for granted was quietly removed from under them. I spent the next 6 hours fully immersed in the legitimate, high-stakes operations of my empire, aggressively negotiating a $40 million acquisition of a failing regional logistics company, completely compartmentalizing the suburban drama waiting for me at home, because true power does not allow the pathetic flailing of a dying parasite to interrupt the steady, forward march of progress. When dusk finally began to paint the city skyline in bruised shades of purple and gold, I locked down my terminal, retreated to my executive dressing room, and slowly, deliberately shed the expensive, tailored armor of the CEO. I pulled the faded, slightly misshapen gray cardigan back over my shoulders, swapped my commanding stilettos for sensible, scuffed flats, and meticulously erased any trace of the ruthless corporate architect from my posture, letting my shoulders slump back into the familiar, exhausted curve of Clara, the unremarkable housewife. The drive back to the suburbs felt different tonight. The air inside my 10-year-old Honda Accord felt lighter, charged with the electric, quiet anticipation of a master chess player watching their opponent willingly walk into an inescapable checkmate. When I finally pulled into the cracked concrete driveway of our modest house, I immediately noticed that Liam's leased BMW was parked at an aggressive, crooked angle, half on the perfectly manicured lawn, a glaring physical manifestation of his rapidly deteriorating mental state. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer, immediately hit by the heavy, suffocating scent of nervous sweat and stale, expensive cologne. Liam was pacing frantically in the kitchen, his tie violently loosened, his perfectly styled hair disheveled as he aggressively mashed the buttons on his phone, muttering frantic, panicked curses under his breath. When he heard my footsteps, he snapped his head up, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and completely feral with a desperate, trapped energy I had never seen in him before. "Where the hell have you been, Clara?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly, completely abandoning the condescending, patronizingly smooth tone he usually reserved for me. "I have been trying to reach you all afternoon. My goddamn cards are all glitching. The bank's entire server system must be down, and I can't get a hold of anyone to fix this absolute nightmare." I set my cheap canvas tote bag gently on the counter, my face a flawless, impenetrable mask of mild, wifely concern and naive confusion. "I was just at the grocery store, Liam. My phone must have died in my purse." "What exactly do you mean the bank's servers are down? Did you try logging into the online portal?" He let out a harsh, semi-hysterical bark of laughter, running both hands aggressively through his hair, pacing the length of the kitchen island like a caged animal. "The portal is locked, Clara. The customer service line transferred me to some cryptic automated fraud department that won't even accept my social security number. And Sienna, my PR director, has been entirely unreachable all day, right when we were supposed to finalize the most critical, high-level corporate acquisition of my entire career." He was lying, of course, frantically trying to spin his massive federal-level criminal exposure into a story of minor corporate inconvenience, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of his own importance in front of the woman he viewed as a simpleton. Before I could offer a properly submissive, comforting response, the loud, aggressive screech of tires violently pulling into the driveway shattered the tense kitchen silence, followed almost immediately by the frantic, heavy pounding of fists against our front door. Liam froze, his face draining of all color, his eyes darting toward the hallway like a cornered thief. I walked calmly to the door and opened it, only to be violently shoved aside by Patricia and Richard Cole, who burst into my home radiating absolute unhinged hysteria. Patricia was not wearing her usual flawlessly coordinated country club attire. She was wearing mismatched sweatpants and a silk blouse, her heavy makeup smeared under her eyes, clutching a thick, officially stamped manila envelope to her chest as if it were a shield. Richard looked like he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon, his chest heaving, his face an alarming shade of deep, mottled red. "Liam!" Patricia shrieked, completely ignoring my presence in my own hallway, rushing past me to grab her son by the shoulders, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive shirt. "What have you done? What did you do to the house, Liam?" Men in cheap suits came to the door this morning and handed your father a notice of immediate federal seizure." Liam physically recoiled, stammering incoherently, his carefully constructed universe of lies rapidly collapsing onto his head in real time. "Mom, it's a mistake. It's just a massive bureaucratic error, I swear to God. The bank just crossed some wires with my new commercial LLC." Richard stepped forward, his fists clenched, his voice trembling with a mixture of pure terror and explosive rage. "Crossed wires? The document says you used our primary deed as a secondary collateral guarantee on a $150,000 commercial line of credit that went into immediate, catastrophic default this morning. They are giving us 30 days to vacate the premises, Liam, our home, the house I grew up in." I stood quietly near the doorway, leaning slightly against the wall, my arms folded loosely over my faded cardigan, watching the elite, untouchable Caldwell family publicly disintegrate in my heavily mortgaged suburban kitchen. For years, Patricia had sat in this exact same room, sipping my coffee, boldly telling me that I was lucky a man of Liam's pedigree had stooped down to marry a woman with no ambition, constantly reminding me that their family was built on a legacy of generational wealth and superior intellect. And now that same woman was weeping hysterically over her granite countertops, completely unaware that the silent, unambitious woman standing 4 feet away legally owned the very floorboards she was currently crying on. "I can fix it," Liam gasped desperately, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, his eyes darting wildly around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "I just need a few days to get a hold of Sienna. The funds are secure in the new holding account. I just need to reverse the transfer and pay the penalty fee. I promise you, Dad, I will fix this." Richard slammed his fist down on the kitchen island so hard the ceramic fruit bowl rattled violently against the marble. "There is no few days, Liam. The bank said the debt was entirely purchased by a highly aggressive secondary holding firm called Apex, and they do not negotiate. They do not offer extensions, and they are demanding full, immediate liquidation of the asset." The name Apex hung in the air of my kitchen, a heavy, invisible guillotine blade suspended directly over their heads, and it took every ounce of my practiced psychological restraint not to smile at the absolute perfection of the moment. Liam looked like he was about to physically vomit. He stumbled back against the refrigerator, clutching his chest, his mind frantically scrambling for any possible source of capital to plug the massive, gaping hole in his sinking ship. Slowly, inevitably, his desperate, bloodshot eyes turned away from his weeping parents and locked directly onto me, the quiet, unassuming wife he had completely discarded and betrayed. "Clara," Liam breathed heavily, stepping toward me with a look of sudden, terrifyingly manic hope, reaching out to grasp my shoulders with sweaty, trembling hands. "Clara, you have that old retirement account, right? The 401k from your old data entry jobs before we got married? You never touch it. You always said you were just letting it sit there for an emergency." I looked at his hands, gripping my cheap sweater, marveling at the sheer, bottomless audacity of a man who had literally spent the previous evening slipping a stolen diamond ring onto his mistress's finger, now begging his wife to drain her life savings to save him from federal prison. "Liam, my retirement account?" I asked softly, my voice trembling perfectly with manufactured fear and confusion, playing the role of the terrified spouse to the absolute bitter end. "Yes!" he practically shouted, shaking me slightly, his breath hot and reeking of panic. "I know you have at least 60 or 70,000 in there, Clara. We need to liquidate it right now. Tonight, we can wire it to the bank first thing in the morning to halt the Apex foreclosure process and buy me enough time to find Sienna and get the rest of the capital back." Patricia stopped crying and whipped her head around, staring at me with sudden, vicious entitlement, her previous disdain instantly vanishing, replaced by the aggressive, demanding expectation that I would naturally sacrifice my entire future to save her luxury estate. "Do it, Clara. Patricia demanded loudly, taking a step toward me, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. You owe this family. Liam has provided for you for 5 years, while you did absolutely nothing but sit in this house. If you have hidden money, it is your duty as his wife to hand it over immediately and save this family from ruin. I looked at Patricia's desperate, tear-stained face, then down at Liam's sweaty, pleading eyes, feeling the massive, heavy weight of the last 5 years of disrespect, gaslighting, and emotional exhaustion finally completely lift off my shoulders, leaving behind nothing but cold, absolute sovereignty. I gently but firmly reached up, grabbed Liam's trembling wrists, and physically removed his hands from my shoulders, stepping back out of his desperate reach, my posture perfectly straight, my voice dropping the high-pitched, submissive tremble, settling into the calm, devastatingly flat tone I used to destroy corporate rivals in the boardroom. No, Liam, I said quietly, the single syllable falling into the chaotic kitchen like a heavy stone into a perfectly still pond, instantly silencing the room. I will not be draining my retirement account to save a family that has never once viewed me as anything more than a convenient, invisible appliance. Liam stared at me, his jaw dropping slightly, completely unable to process the absolute, unapologetic refusal coming from the woman he believed was entirely under his control. "Clara, what are you talking about?" he whispered, genuine shock temporarily overriding his panic. "This isn't a negotiation. This is my parents' house. This is my entire career. You have to help me." I slowly reached into my faded canvas tote bag, my fingers bypassing my keys and my wallet, closing firmly around the heavy encrypted tablet I had deliberately brought home from the Apex penthouse. "I don't have to do anything, Liam," I replied, pulling the sleek black tablet out and setting it gently on the marble island, the screen remaining dark and quiet. Because unlike you, I actually read the fine print on the documents I sign, and I highly suggest you sit down because the problem you are currently facing is significantly worse than a simple bank glitch. I tapped the biometric sensor on the encrypted tablet, the screen flashing to life and illuminating the dark imported marble of the kitchen island with a cold, unforgiving blue light as Liam, Patricia, and Richard stared at me in stunned, breathless silence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply turned the sleek device toward my husband, displaying a high-resolution, side-by-side forensic analysis of the commercial loan document he had submitted to the regional bank 3 weeks ago. That is a $150,000 commercial line of credit, Liam, supposedly secured by our joint emergency savings, but heavily collateralized by a fraudulent secondary lien on your parents' historic estate and authorized by a signature you blindly forged in my name, I said, my words dropping like absolute anvils into the suffocating, heavy quiet of the suburban kitchen. Liam's eyes went wide, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a suffocating fish as he stared in absolute horror at the red digital circles highlighting the microscopic inconsistencies in his forgery. The reverse slant, the unnatural pen lifts, the undeniable mathematical proof of his federal crime staring him directly in the face. Where the hell did you get this?" he finally choked out, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper, instinctively reaching out with sweaty fingers to snatch the device before I calmly, fluidly slid it out of his reach. "I have always kept a very close eye on our digital footprint and household finances," I replied smoothly, leaning slightly over the counter, perfectly maintaining the flawless illusion of a betrayed but highly organized, meticulous housewife who had simply dug too deep into the family computer to uncover an affair. When I noticed the initial $80,000 missing from our joint investment accounts last month, I quietly hired an independent certified forensic accountant to audit your recent activities. And what they found wasn't just simple infidelity, Liam. It was systemic, arrogant, catastrophic corporate fraud. Patricia gasped loudly, aggressively clutching the collar of her silk blouse, but true to her deeply toxic, narcissistic nature, her horror was not directed at her golden son's criminality, but at my sheer audacity to expose it and disrupt their perfect facade. "You hired an accountant behind your husband's back?" Patricia shrieked, her face twisting in aristocratic entitled fury, stepping toward me as if she intended to physically intimidate me. "How dare you? He was trying to build a legacy for this family, you ungrateful wretch. And if he had to move some liquid assets around to temporarily secure his new PR firm, it was only because you were completely useless in providing him with the proper financial support a wife of his caliber should offer." I looked at Patricia, feeling a profound, chilling sense of pity for a woman so blindly, desperately devoted to the illusion of her son's greatness that she would gladly drown herself in his sinking ship rather than admit he was a failure. "He didn't just move assets around, Patricia. He committed textbook wire fraud and identity theft," I stated calmly, my voice easily cutting through her hysterical, defensive screaming, anchoring the room in cold, hard legal reality. "And when he took those fraudulently obtained funds and wired them across state lines into Sienna's LLC this morning to hide them from the primary lenders, he officially elevated his mistake to a Class C federal felony, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of up to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Richard sank heavily onto one of the padded leather bar stools, his face buried deeply in his trembling hands. The crushing, inescapable reality of his lost generational home and his only son's impending incarceration finally breaking through his arrogant country club facade. "Oh my God," Richard whispered, his voice cracking with genuine, unfiltered despair. "The bank, the foreclosure notice. We're going to lose absolutely everything because you wanted to play big shot with a 28-year-old girl you met at a networking mixer." Liam violently shook his head, his eyes wild, feverish, and darting around the room as he desperately clung to his last remaining, pathetic delusion, completely unable to accept the fact that he had been entirely outmaneuvered by the quiet woman he had treated like an invisible appliance for half a decade. No, you don't understand, Dad. It's fine. It's totally fine. Sienna is brilliant. She has the capital securely locked in the Delaware Trust," Liam shouted, his voice cracking with manic desperation as he backed away from the kitchen island, frantically pulling his cell phone from his tailored suit jacket. "I just need to find her. I'll go to her apartment right now. We can transfer the money back to Apex Holdings. We can pay off the secondary lien tomorrow morning before the federal regulators even notice the discrepancy. Right there, in the middle of our kitchen, with his weeping parents watching and his wife standing 4 feet away, my husband dialed his mistress's number, pressing the phone aggressively to his ear, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. The call went straight to a generic, automated voicemail. "Sienna, baby, pick up the phone. It's Liam," he pleaded into the receiver, completely abandoning any shred of decency or respect for me, the sheer audacity of calling his mistress baby, in my presence proving exactly how little he valued my existence. "The bank is acting completely crazy. My wife found out about the loan. I need you to confirm the LLC transfer is reversible so we can pause the foreclosure on the estate. Call me back the absolute second you get this." He hung up, his chest heaving, wiping a bead of cold sweat from his forehead, genuinely believing that his slick, beautiful PR director was going to save him from federal ruin. I watched him frantically button his suit jacket with shaking fingers, marveling at the terrifying depth of his narcissistic blindness. He genuinely still believed that Sienna, my senior forensic auditor, who was currently sitting in my biometric-locked penthouse compiling his final, devastating arrest dossier for the FBI, was a loyal, adoring partner waiting in the wings to build an empire with him. "You really think she's going to save you, Liam?" I asked softly, a genuine note of dark, clinical curiosity in my voice as I reached over and tapped the tablet screen off, plunging the kitchen back into dim, shadowy, suffocating light. "She loves me, Clara," he spat back, his face twisting into a mask of cruel, defensive arrogance, finally dropping the absolute last shred of his marital facade and revealing the venomous, selfish boy underneath. She understands high stakes. She understands ambition. She's twice the woman you will ever be, and once we fix this minor liquidity issue and get the firm off the ground, I am filing for divorce and taking whatever is left in that pathetic little retirement account of yours as alimony for wasting my prime years. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. And I certainly didn't argue with his childish insults. I simply offered him a slow, perfectly detached nod of acknowledgement, internally accepting the final, undeniable confirmation of his absolute moral bankruptcy. "Then you better go find her," I said quietly, gesturing smoothly toward the front hallway. Liam didn't hesitate for a single second. He turned and practically sprinted down the hall, the heavy oak front door slamming shut so violently it rattled the framed wedding pictures on the wall, followed seconds later by the aggressive, roaring start of his leased BMW tearing out of the driveway and speeding recklessly into the night. Patricia and Richard remained in my kitchen, a tragic, broken tableau of failed elitism, completely paralyzed by the sudden evaporation of their false reality and the terrifying silence Liam left behind. "You have to help us," Patricia whispered, her voice finally stripped of its haughty, demanding tone, replaced by a hollow, pathetic, trembling fear as she stared at the empty space where her son had just stood. "You have to call your accountant, Clara. Tell them to retract the audit. Tell them it was a horrible misunderstanding. You can't just let them take the house we raised him in." I picked up my faded canvas tote bag, slipped the heavy encrypted tablet safely inside, and looked at my mother-in-law with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a frozen lake in the dead of winter. "I cannot retract the mathematical truth, Patricia," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the vast, heavily mortgaged room, utterly devoid of the warmth she had never once earned. "And I highly suggest you and Richard go home right now and start packing your belongings, because the holding company that bought your distressed debt does not offer grace periods to people who finance their arrogance with stolen money." I didn't wait for her to formulate a response. I simply turned my back on them and walked slowly, deliberately up the stairs to the master bedroom, the soft click of my sensible flats against the hardwood floor sounding exactly like the steady, inescapable ticking of a countdown clock. I walked past the cheap, uninspired furniture Liam had picked out for us, opened the back of my closet, and pulled out a sleek, expensive leather overnight bag, a high-end piece of luggage Liam had never even noticed hiding behind my winter coats. I systematically packed exactly 3 flawlessly tailored power suits, my heavy gold heirloom jewelry, my secure corporate laptops, and a single pair of aggressive, red-soled stiletto heels. I was not packing to run away, and I was certainly not packing to hide. I was packing to finally shed the suffocating skin of the invisible housewife and return to my true, absolute throne in the city. I carried the bag down the stairs, ignoring the quiet, pathetic sobbing coming from the kitchen where my in-laws were still sitting in shock, and left the house through the attached garage, climbing into the driver's seat of my humble Honda sedan for the very last time. As I pulled out of the quiet, manicured suburban neighborhood, watching the familiar streetlights and the house that had acted as my prison fade into the rearview mirror, my secure burner phone buzzed sharply against the passenger seat. I picked it up at the first red light. It was a highly encrypted text message from Special Agent Jamal Washington of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the man I had secretly coordinated with for the past month to ensure Liam's downfall was legally airtight. The message was short, incredibly clinical, and devastatingly beautiful to read. Federal warrants have been officially authorized and signed by the judge. Target's financial accounts are fully frozen. We will execute the arrest warrant publicly at his venue tomorrow night at 2000 hours. Dress accordingly, Miss Caldwell. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression of pure, unadulterated sovereignty that transformed my entire face, tossing the phone back onto the seat and pressing the accelerator down, merging smoothly onto the highway toward my Manhattan penthouse, ready and eager to completely dismantle the man who foolishly thought he could build a glittering empire on my broken back. Before we move on to the explosive events of the gala, let me know in the comments if you think Patricia and Richard deserve to lose their home for enabling Liam's toxic behavior, or if you think Clara should have warned them earlier. The transition from the suffocating, manicured silence of the suburban neighborhood to the electric, pulsing energy of Manhattan at midnight felt less like a simple commute and more like a profound spiritual resurrection. As my 10-year-old Honda Accord crossed the bridge, the tires humming rhythmically against the asphalt, I felt the heavy, restrictive layers of Clara, the unremarkable, submissive housewife, violently peeling away, leaving only the cold, sharp, unyielding architecture of the woman I had always truly been underneath. I bypassed the public garages and swiped my encrypted keycard at the private, heavily fortified subterranean entrance of a towering luxury high-rise in Tribeca, pulling into a designated parking space that cost more per month than Liam's heavily financed leased BMW. I took the direct biometric locked elevator up to the penthouse floor, the doors sliding silently open to reveal my true sanctuary, a sprawling 5,000-square-foot masterpiece of glass, imported black marble, and minimalist elegance that I had purchased entirely in cash 3 years ago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, unobstructed, panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, a stark and beautiful contrast to the depressing view of Patricia and Richard's perfectly trimmed hedges I had forced myself to endure for the last 5 years. I left my cheap canvas tote bag and the faded cardigan near the entryway, feeling a wave of intense, cleansing relief wash over me as I stepped out of the scuffed suburban flats and walked barefoot across the heated floors toward the master suite. I didn't cry for the death of my marriage. I didn't feel the sudden, chaotic urge to break down or mourn the loss of a man who had only ever viewed me as a convenient, invisible appliance designed specifically to absorb his failures and subsidize his pathetic delusions of grandeur. Instead, I poured myself a single glass of exceptionally rare vintage Yamazaki whiskey, walked over to the massive glass window, and looked down at the city, feeling a deep, profound sense of absolute sovereignty settling into my bones. For half a decade, I had intentionally shrunk myself, hiding my massive intellect, my corporate ruthlessness, and my vast financial resources simply because society had convinced me that a successful, powerful woman needed to diminish her own light in order to protect the incredibly fragile ego of the man she loved. I had foolishly believed that if I gave Liam enough quiet support, enough invisible financial safety nets, and enough unconditional patience, he would eventually grow into the leader he so desperately pretended to be. But all my sacrifice had done was create an arrogant, entitled monster who genuinely believed his success was entirely his own, and my presence was merely an unfortunate burden. Before I tell you how we orchestrated the final, devastating trap at the estate, let me know in the comments if you have ever had to completely hide your own success, your intelligence, or your financial stability just to protect the fragile ego of a partner or family member who ultimately betrayed you anyway. I finished the whiskey, the sharp, smoky liquid burning pleasantly in my chest, and went to sleep in a king-sized bed wrapped in 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton, enjoying the first truly deep, completely unburdened night of rest I had experienced in 5 agonizing years. When I woke up the next morning, the bright golden city sunlight was streaming flawlessly through the smart glass, illuminating a perfectly quiet, pristine environment that belonged entirely to me, untainted by Liam's frantic, chaotic energy or his constant, belittling demands. I walked into the massive spa-like master bathroom, standing under the rainfall shower until the hot water completely washed away the lingering, stale scent of the suburban house. And then I stepped into my walk-in closet, which was the size of Liam's entire master bedroom. I meticulously selected my armor for the day, a flawlessly tailored, bespoke ivory silk suit that draped perfectly over my frame, paired with a subtle but fiercely expensive pair of diamond stud earrings and aggressive pointed-toe stiletto heels that announced my presence before I even entered a room. I didn't bother making coffee. I simply ordered a private car, the sleek black luxury sedan arriving downstairs within 5 minutes to whisk me directly to the executive underground parking garage of Apex Resolution Partners. The moment I stepped out of the elevator and onto the penthouse floor of my firm, the atmosphere was crackling with a highly focused, predatory energy. My entire staff of brilliant analysts and ruthless attorneys moving with military precision as they finalized the complete dismantling of Liam Cole's life. I walked straight into my corner office, where Sterling and Sienna were already waiting for me, both of them standing near the massive digital strategy board, completely surrounded by complex financial flow charts and real-time tracking data of Liam's rapidly deteriorating situation. Sienna looked up as I entered, a sharp, genuinely feral smile playing on her lips, her posture radiating the cold, calculating confidence of an apex predator who had just successfully cornered her prey. "Good morning, boss," Sienna greeted, handing me a freshly brewed espresso in a porcelain cup, completely dropping the vapid, high-pitched persona she had used to mesmerize my foolish husband. "I hope you slept exceptionally well, because Liam has been having the absolute worst morning of his entire pathetic existence." I took a slow sip of the espresso, the rich, bitter caffeine sharpening my focus, and leaned against the edge of my mahogany desk. "Give me the exact timeline of his panic, Sienna. I want to know exactly how deeply he is thrashing in the net." Sienna tapped a few commands into her encrypted tablet, bringing up a series of security camera feeds on the main monitor. At precisely 7:30 this morning, Liam showed up at the address I gave him for my supposed PR firm's downtown headquarters, desperately seeking to reverse the $150,000 wire transfer he fraudulently initiated yesterday. He completely bypassed the front desk, rode the elevator up to the 14th floor, and burst through the double doors, only to discover that the suite was entirely empty, stripped down to the bare drywall, with a single legally binding eviction notice taped to the glass. I watched the silent black and white security footage of Liam standing alone in the massive vacant office space, his hands tearing through his perfectly styled hair, his mouth open in a silent scream of absolute, mind-shattering panic as he realized the glittering, high-society PR director he was ready to throw his marriage away for was nothing but a beautiful, terrifying phantom. He immediately tried to call my burner phone 27 consecutive times, Sienna continued, her voice dripping with clinical amusement, pointing to the call log displayed on the screen. When I didn't answer, he frantically dialed his bank again, finally managing to aggressively bully his way up to a senior fraud investigator, who coldly informed him that due to a highly classified directive from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, his entire portfolio, including his checking, savings, and corporate accounts, had been permanently frozen pending a federal indictment. Sterling adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, stepping forward with a crisp, newly printed legal manifesto. And because his accounts are frozen, his leased BMW was officially reported as stolen by the dealership at 9 o'clock this morning, due to 3 consecutive months of severely delinquent, uncollectible payments. If a patrol officer runs his plates today, he will be pulled over at gunpoint and arrested for grand theft auto before he even reaches the venue. The sheer, absolute totality of his destruction was almost poetic, a perfectly orchestrated symphony of consequences designed specifically to target the only things Liam Cole actually cared about: his false wealth, his public image, and his unearned status. "What is the status of the Magnolia estate?" I asked quietly, my mind shifting toward the grand, highly publicized gala Liam had foolishly planned for tonight, intending to use his parents' historic home to publicly launch his new PR firm and soft launch his new mistress to the city's elite. Sterling smiled, a thin, deeply satisfying expression. "The estate is fully secure, CEO Caldwell. The anonymous holding company legally finalized the distressed debt acquisition yesterday, meaning you are the sole, uncontested owner of the property. Liam has already hired an incredibly expensive, exclusive catering company, a string quartet, and a high-end lighting crew to transform the grounds for the gala tonight, all of which he paid for using a combination of bad checks and the fraudulent commercial loan that is currently sitting securely in our corporate accounts." The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. Liam was actively throwing a massive black tie celebration to publicly humiliate his wife and elevate his mistress, completely unaware that he was hosting the party in a house his wife secretly owned, using money his wife secretly controlled, while his mistress was actively coordinating his federal arrest with his wife. "Has Special Agent Washington confirmed the tactical perimeter?" I asked, turning my attention to the final, most crucial piece of the board. Sienna nodded sharply, pulling up a highly encrypted, secure message thread from the IRS CID field office. "Agent Washington confirmed that 2 heavily armed tactical units will be fully embedded in the catering staff and the valet parking team by 5 o'clock this evening. They are giving Liam just enough rope to hang himself completely. They want him to stand on that stage, in front of all his wealthy country club friends, and publicly claim ownership of the fraudulent assets before they drop the hammer." I set my espresso cup down on the desk, feeling a cold, terrifying calm settle completely over my mind, the kind of absolute, unshakable peace that only comes when you are standing at the absolute pinnacle of your power. "Excellent. I want you both to attend the gala tonight, but maintain your distance until the trap is fully sprung. Sienna, you will play your part perfectly. Wear the dress, stand by his side, let him genuinely believe that you are his salvation, right up until the exact second you completely destroy him." Sienna's eyes gleamed with cold anticipation. "It will be my absolute pleasure, boss." As my team filtered out of the office to finalize the logistical details of the raid, my burner phone, the one Liam still had the number to, vibrated violently against the polished wood of my desk. I picked it up and unlocked the screen, unsurprised to see a frantic, highly aggressive text message from my soon-to-be ex-husband, completely confirming that his narcissistic delusion was still desperately attempting to override his sheer terror. The message read, "Clara, I don't know where you went last night, but you need to come back immediately. My parents are having a complete nervous breakdown about the bank error, and the gala is tonight. You have to show up, wear the black dress I bought you, and play the supportive wife in front of the investors. If you ruin this night for me by throwing a tantrum and hiding, I swear to God I will make the divorce the most painful, expensive nightmare of your life. Be at the estate by 7. I read the message twice, marveling at the sheer bottomless arrogance required to threaten a woman while simultaneously drowning in federal crimes, genuinely believing he still held any modicum of power or control over my existence. I didn't reply. I simply locked the phone, dropped it carelessly into my leather bag, and turned toward the massive window overlooking my city, a cold, devastating smile spreading slowly across my face as I mentally prepared to attend the gala, not as the pathetic, submissive housewife he commanded, but as the absolute, undisputed owner of the very ground he was standing on, ready to watch the IRS physically drag him out of his own twisted fantasy in handcuffs. The private luxury sedan navigated the winding, ancient, oak-lined driveway of the Magnolia estate exactly at 7:30 in the evening, the heavy tires crunching rhythmically over the pristine white gravel as we approached the glittering, fraudulent spectacle my husband had orchestrated for his own demise. Through the tinted windows, I observed the sprawling, historic brick mansion entirely illuminated by high-end theatrical architectural lighting, casting long, dramatic shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns, where a hired string quartet was currently playing a flawless, vibrant rendition of Vivaldi's Summer. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of the scene was almost paralyzing. Liam had spared absolutely no expense, hiring an army of white-gloved waitstaff who circulated effortlessly through the crowd of over 100 wealthy country club elites, carrying silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and imported caviar canapes, all of it paid for with the stolen, cross-collateralized funds that had officially doomed his entire existence. As the sedan rolled to a smooth stop beneath the grand portico, a valet in a crisp, spotless uniform immediately stepped forward to open my door, his posture sharp and intensely observant. I caught the faint, unmistakable bulge of a concealed tactical holster beneath his tailored vest, confirming that Special Agent Washington's undercover IRS CID perimeter was already fully embedded and waiting for my signal. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cool evening breeze catching the edges of my bespoke ivory silk suit, my aggressive stiletto heels clicking sharply against the imported cobblestones as I bypassed the crowded main entrance and walked straight through the massive double mahogany front doors. The grand foyer was practically suffocating with the heavy, expensive perfumes and loud, boastful laughter of the city's financial elite. But the moment I crossed the threshold, my eyes instinctively bypassed the glittering crowd and locked directly onto the deeply tragic, pathetic tableau of my soon-to-be ex-in-laws. Patricia and Richard Cole were standing near the base of the sweeping grand staircase, desperately attempting to project their usual aura of aristocratic, untouchable superiority. But beneath the diamond necklaces and custom tuxedos, they looked completely hollowed out, their skin possessing a distinct, sickly gray pallor of absolute, inescapable terror. Patricia was gripping her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her eyes darting frantically around the room as if expecting the federal marshals to burst through the windows at any given second, while Richard simply stared blankly at the antique chandelier, drinking heavily from a glass of neat scotch, fully realizing that he was standing as a guest in a home he had just permanently lost. Before I continue, let me know in the comments if you have ever had to attend an event where everyone was smiling and celebrating, but you secretly knew the entire foundation of their happiness was a complete, devastating lie. I didn't approach them. I simply glided past the sweeping staircase and entered the main ballroom where the sheer density of Liam's delusion was on full, horrifying display. A massive 80-inch high-definition LED screen dominated the far wall, currently looping a sleek, highly produced corporate branding video for Apex PR Innovations, the completely phantom company Liam believed he was launching tonight. And there he was, standing dead center in the room, bathed in the flattering golden glow of the chandeliers, wearing a leased, custom-tailored velvet tuxedo that barely concealed the frantic, wild, animalistic panic radiating from every single pore of his sweating body. He was talking animatedly to a group of regional venture capitalists, laughing a little too loudly, gesturing a little too wildly, desperately trying to ignore the fact that his bank accounts were entirely frozen, and his leased BMW was currently sitting in a police impound lot after he'd been forced to take an Uber to his own gala. Standing perfectly by his side, playing her assigned role with terrifying, flawless precision, was Sienna, draped in a stunning, backless crimson evening gown that commanded the attention of every man in the room, a heavy, $45,000 diamond engagement ring sparkling violently on her left hand. Liam genuinely believed that ring was his ultimate triumph, his physical claim over an elite woman, entirely blind to the fact that Sienna had personally logged that exact piece of jewelry into an FBI evidence ledger just 3 hours prior. As I moved quietly through the edge of the crowd, keeping my presence completely unobtrusive, Liam's bloodshot, terrified eyes finally snapped through the sea of guests and locked onto me, a sudden vicious flash of pure, controlling rage contorting his handsome face as he immediately excused himself from the investors and marched aggressively in my direction. He grabbed my elbow with a harsh, bruising grip, completely abandoning any pretense of affection, and forcibly pulled me into a dimly lit alcove near the catering kitchen doors, out of sight of his wealthy targets. "You are 30 minutes late, Clara," he hissed venomously, his breath smelling heavily of stress and expensive scotch, his manicured fingers digging painfully into the expensive silk of my blazer. "And what the hell are you wearing? I explicitly laid out the plain black dress on the bed for you. You look like you're trying to upstage the actual executives in this room, which is completely pathetic considering you don't even have a real career." I looked down at his trembling hand gripping my arm, feeling absolutely zero fear, only a cold, clinical disgust for the small, fragile, desperate boy hiding inside the tailored suit. "The black dress didn't fit my mood tonight, Liam," I replied smoothly, my voice perfectly level, completely devoid of the terrified, submissive waver he so desperately needed to hear. "And I highly suggest you release my arm right now because the valet staff outside have a very clear line of sight into this hallway, and I don't think you want to cause a public scene before your big speech." He blinked, genuinely taken aback by the icy, absolute authority in my tone, his hand instinctively dropping from my elbow as if he had just touched a live electrical wire. He quickly recovered his false bravado, puffing out his chest and leaning in close to my face, attempting to intimidate me with sheer proximity. "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of panic and malice. "I don't know what kind of independent, rebellious phase you think you're going through, and I don't care about whatever fake forensic documents you showed my parents last night. Tonight is the most important night of my entire life. Sienna and I are launching a firm that will easily clear $10 million in revenue by next year, and you are going to walk out there, smile at the camera, and play the supportive, quiet wife who is stepping aside amicably." He paused, his eyes narrowing into dark, cruel slits. "If you try to embarrass me, if you say a single word about the loan or the bank glitch to anyone in this room, I will completely destroy you in the divorce. I will leave you with absolutely nothing." I stared directly into his frantic, dilated eyes, marveling at the sheer, breathtaking density of his psychological blindness. He was a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, threatening the executioner with a paper cut. "I have absolutely no intention of embarrassing you, Liam," I said quietly, a genuine, terrifying smile finally blooming across my face, the kind of smile that made his breath hitch nervously in his throat. "I want you to go out there, stand on that stage, and tell everyone in this room exactly who you are and exactly what you've built. I want you to claim your entire legacy." Liam stared at me for a long, heavy second, his mind clearly struggling to process my sudden, chilling compliance, but his massive, inflated ego quickly overrode his survival instincts, convincing him that he had successfully terrified me back into submission. "Good," he grunted, aggressively adjusting his velvet bow tie and smoothing his lapels. "Just stand near the back, Clara. Try not to draw any attention to yourself." He turned on his heel and marched back out into the glittering ballroom, desperately eager to return to Sienna's side and resume his pathetic pantomime of extreme wealth. I remained in the shadows of the alcove for a few more moments, slowly brushing the invisible taint of his grip from my silk sleeve, waiting patiently until I heard the sharp, chiming sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, and a heavy, expectant hush fell over the 100 guests as Liam proudly ascended the short, beautifully decorated wooden stairs to the raised VIP stage at the front of the ballroom, pulling Sienna up gently by the hand to stand next to him in the blinding glare of the high-intensity spotlights. The massive LED screen behind them shifted from the fake corporate logo to a live multi-camera feed of the stage, ensuring that every single facial expression would be perfectly broadcasted to the entire room. Liam grabbed the sleek silver microphone off its stand, clearing his throat, his face practically glowing with unearned triumph and absolute blinding narcissism. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and beloved family," Liam began, his voice booming smoothly through the state-of-the-art speakers, projecting the flawless, confident cadence of a visionary leader. "Thank you all so much for gathering tonight at the historic Magnolia Estate to celebrate not just the launch of a new public relations empire, but the dawn of a completely new era." The crowd offered a polite, murmuring applause, the wealthy investors nodding in shallow approval, while Patricia and Richard stood frozen in the front row, looking like prisoners waiting for a firing squad. None of this incredible success would be possible without my brilliant investment portfolio, my aggressive vision for the future, and of course the unparalleled genius of my new senior partner and soon-to-be my beautiful wife, Sienna Miller. Liam continued, openly kissing Sienna's cheek as a few guests gasped quietly at the brazen public declaration of his infidelity, while his current wife was supposedly in the room. Liam turned back to the crowd, his smile twisting into a cruel, arrogant smirk. "And to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Clara, who is currently standing in the back of the room packing her mental bags to return to her quiet, unambitious little life. Thank you for the clean slate, because I am finally stepping into the elite echelon where I truly belong." The room fell into a dead, uncomfortable silence, the cruelty of his statement hanging heavily in the air, but I didn't hide. I didn't look down at my feet. I simply stepped out of the shadows, walked calmly past the murmuring guests, and ascended the sweeping glass and steel balcony staircase that overlooked the entire ballroom, positioning myself directly above the stage where Liam was standing. I looked down at Special Agent Washington, who was currently disguised as the lead banquet captain near the main doors, and I gave him one slow, deliberate nod. Instantly, a sudden, brutal, ear-piercing screech of audio feedback ripped through the ballroom speakers, causing half the guests to cover their ears in pain as the brilliant stage spotlights violently snapped off, plunging Liam and Sienna into heavy, confusing shadows, while a single high-intensity blazing white spotlight snapped on from the ceiling, pinning me perfectly against the glass balcony in my ivory suit, completely commanding the visual authority of the entire estate. The absolute breathless silence that instantly blanketed the sprawling ballroom was so profound, so incredibly heavy, that I could actually hear the faint rhythmic ticking of the vintage Rolex on the wrist of the venture capitalist standing directly beneath my balcony. The blazing, high-intensity spotlight completely isolated me against the sleek glass and brushed steel railing, illuminating my bespoke ivory silk suit, like a beacon of absolute, undeniable authority in a room previously suffocated by my husband's dark, frantic delusions. Down on the stage, stripped of his flattering lighting and his artificial confidence, Liam took a hesitant, stumbling step backward, his face rapidly draining of all color, his eyes squinting violently against the sudden, blinding glare shining down on him. He raised a trembling hand to shield his face, completely unable to comprehend how the quiet, unremarkable housewife he had verbally abused and discarded in a dim alcove just 20 minutes prior was now commanding the physical and auditory control of his $1 million launch party. I reached out and gently gripped the sleek black wireless microphone that Special Agent Washington had discreetly left resting on the balcony railing for me, feeling the cool, heavy metal ground my swirling energy into a sharp, lethal spear of pure intent. "You gave a remarkably passionate speech, Liam," I said, my voice echoing through the massive, state-of-the-art acoustic system, completely devoid of anger, entirely stripped of the high-pitched submissive tremor I had weaponized for 5 years. settling instead into the calm, devastatingly flat, rich baritone of a woman who owned the very air he was currently breathing. A completely inspiring tale of aggressive vision, unparalleled genius, and the elite echelon you believe you are stepping into, but you made one incredibly critical, fatal error in your opening remarks. I paused, letting the heavy, terrifying weight of my calm tone press down on the 100 wealthy guests, watching the regional investors subtly, physically step away from the stage, their predatory business instincts instantly recognizing that Liam was no longer the apex predator in the room, but the bleeding prey. You completely forgot to thank the actual legal host of this evening's festivities. Liam's jaw dropped, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths, and he desperately turned toward the shadows near the catering doors, waving his arms frantically. "Cut the mic!" he hissed loudly, his voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated terror, entirely abandoning his smooth corporate persona. "Security? Get her off that balcony right now! Cut the goddamn audio!" But the men in the black earpieces standing at the perimeter of the room did not move. They simply crossed their arms, their eyes locked securely on me, waiting for my absolute command. I offered a slow, chilling smile that felt like ice cracking over a frozen lake. "There is no security coming to save you, Liam, because the men standing at the doors do not work for your catered event. They work for the United States federal government, and they are currently standing on private property that belongs exclusively to me." A loud, collective gasp rippled violently through the sea of expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos, the wealthy elite practically vibrating with the scandalous electric shock of witnessing a high society execution in real time. Down in the front row, Patricia Cole let out a weak, pathetic whimper, her knees visibly buckling slightly, forcing Richard to grab her arm to keep her from collapsing directly onto the imported hardwood floor. Before I show you exactly how we completely dismantled his fake empire, let me know in the comments if you think a public, undeniable exposure is the only way to truly stop a narcissist from twisting the narrative and playing the victim. What are you talking about, Clara? Have you lost your absolute mind? Liam shouted into his own microphone, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative, his voice echoing shrilly in a pathetic attempt to project dominance. "This is my parents' estate. This is my PR firm. You are having a psychotic break. Get down here right now." I didn't verbally argue with his childish, frantic denial. I simply raised my left hand and snapped my fingers once, a sharp, crisp sound that was instantly picked up by the microphone. Immediately, the massive 80-inch LED screen behind Liam violently flickered to life, entirely replacing the sleek, fake Apex PR Innovations logo with a massive, high-resolution scan of a certified, notarized property deed. The letters were 10 feet tall, glowing with unforgiving brightness, displaying the official transfer of the Magnolia estate from the Regional Banking Authority directly to Apex Holdings, LLC, clearly listing Clara Caldwell as the sole, uncontested chief executive officer and primary line holder. "I am not having a psychotic break, Liam," I replied smoothly, my voice cutting through the rising, chaotic murmurs of the crowd like a surgical scalpel. "I am simply evicting you. You cross-collateralized your parents' already defaulted second mortgage to secure the commercial lease for a public relations firm that does not exist, using funds you fraudulently obtained by forging my signature on a federal line of credit. I bought the distressed debt on this property 48 hours ago for 40 cents on the dollar, which means you are currently trespassing in my house, drinking my champagne, and lying to my guests." Liam slowly turned his head to look at the massive screen behind him, his eyes tracing the undeniable legal proof of his absolute financial ruin, the crushing, inescapable reality of his stupidity finally shattering his thick, narcissistic armor. He dropped his silver microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, painful thud that echoed through the silent room, but he didn't even flinch. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his mouth opening and closing in a silent, suffocating panic, completely paralyzed by the exposure. Desperate for any remaining lifeline, any shred of his fabricated elite reality, he violently turned towards Sienna, reaching out with a trembling, sweaty hand to grab her arm. "Sienna, tell them!" he pleaded, his voice nothing more than a pathetic, broken whimper. "Tell them about the Delaware LLC. Tell them the capital is secure. We can fix this. We can transfer the funds back to the bank right now. Please, baby, tell them you have the money." Sienna did not reach back to comfort him. She did not offer the breathy, wide-eyed, submissive reassurance he so desperately craved. Instead, she took one precise, calculated step away from him, her posture instantly shedding the soft, alluring curves of a mistress and locking into the rigid, intimidating stance of a corporate assassin. She reached down, smoothly picked up the microphone he had dropped, and turned to face the crowd, her expression completely devoid of any warmth or affection. "There is no Delaware LLC, Liam," Sienna stated, her voice brisk, cold, and strictly professional, sounding absolutely nothing like the giggling girl he had taken to the steakhouse. "And there is no PR firm." She lifted her left hand, the heavy $45,000 diamond engagement ring sparkling under the ambient light, and with a fluid, dismissive motion, she slid the massive ring off her finger. She turned to the small cocktail table on the stage, picked up Liam's half-empty crystal flute of vintage champagne, and carelessly dropped the diamond into the liquid. It sank to the bottom with a heavy metallic clink that sounded incredibly loud in the dead, silent room. "Keep your stolen, fraudulent assets, Liam. They are going to need to liquidate every single piece of jewelry you own just to cover your federal defense attorneys." Liam stared at the glass, then at Sienna, his brain entirely unable to process the absolute, terrifying betrayal unfolding in front of him. "Sienna, what are you doing? You love me," he stammered, entirely broken, tears of pure, unadulterated panic finally welling up in his eyes. Sienna offered a thin, merciless smile, her sharp eyes flicking up to the balcony to meet my gaze before looking back down at the pathetic man entirely destroyed by his own arrogance. "My name is Sienna Miller," she announced clearly to the room, the microphone projecting her true authority perfectly. "I am not a public relations director. I am the senior forensic auditor for Apex Resolution Partners. Clara Caldwell is my chief executive officer, and for the last 3 months she has paid me $250,000 a year to operate completely undercover, meticulously tracking, recording, and legally verifying every single instance of your corporate embezzlement, your wire fraud, and your desperate, pathetic attempts to hide your insolvency." The entire ballroom erupted into a chaotic, buzzing frenzy of whispered shock. Several of the venture capitalists actually pulled out their phones, realizing they had been inches away from investing millions of dollars into a completely fabricated company run by a federal criminal. Liam physically collapsed onto his knees, his tailored velvet tuxedo crumpling awkwardly around him, the absolute crushing weight of his exposed reality entirely breaking his spine. He buried his face in his hands, finally sobbing, completely stripped of his arrogant superiority, reduced to nothing more than a terrified, cowardly boy who had foolishly tried to steal a crown from a queen who built the entire kingdom. The massive LED screen shifted once more, moving from the property deed to a highly organized, heavily redacted federal dossier, clearly displaying the real-time wire transfer logs, the forensic handwriting analysis of the forged signature, and the automated bank freezes that had locked his accounts that morning. "You wanted to be an elite man, Liam," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the absolute chilling finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You wanted to play high-stakes games in a world you absolutely did not understand. You constantly belittled my intellect, you openly mocked my clothes, and you genuinely believed that my silence was a symptom of my weakness, completely failing to realize that I was simply waiting for you to build your own perfect prison." I looked down at Special Agent Washington, who was already stepping out of the shadows near the entrance, shedding the white valet jacket to reveal his dark federal windbreaker, his gold IRS CID badge gleaming brightly against his chest. "Agent Washington, the stage is yours," I commanded softly. The heavy double doors of the ballroom violently burst open, and a highly coordinated, heavily armed tactical team of 6 federal agents marched flawlessly into the room, their boots echoing sharply against the hardwood. The wealthy guests immediately parted like the Red Sea, pressing themselves frantically against the walls to avoid the path of the federal raid. Agent Washington walked directly up the stage stairs, completely ignoring Sienna, and stood towering over Liam's sobbing, kneeling form. "Liam Cole," Agent Washington barked, his voice carrying no sympathy, entirely strictly business. "You are under arrest for 2 counts of federal wire fraud, 1 count of aggravated identity theft, and 1 count of commercial bank fraud." Washington aggressively grabbed Liam by the back of his expensive velvet jacket, hauling him roughly to his feet, forcefully twisting his arms behind his back. The heavy metallic, terrifyingly absolute click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around Liam's wrists echoed through the microphone still resting on the cocktail table, a sound that finally, completely severed the last remaining invisible tether, connecting me to the agonizing, parasitic 5 years of my marriage. "No, please, it's a mistake. I can pay it back, Clara. Tell them I can pay it back." Liam screamed, completely losing any shred of his dignity, thrashing pathetically against the grip of the federal agents as they began to physically drag him toward the exit. He looked up at the balcony, his face stained with tears and sweat, begging the very woman he had planned to leave with absolutely nothing. "Clara, please, you're my wife. You have to help me. Don't let them take me." I looked down at him, my face a flawless, impenetrable mask of cold, absolute peace, and I did not say a single word. I simply reached out and pressed the small button on the base of my wireless microphone, instantly cutting the audio feed, plunging his frantic, hysterical screams back into the normal, unamplified acoustics of the room, leaving him to drown entirely in his own pathetic noise. As the agents dragged Liam past the front row, Patricia Cole completely snapped. The fragile, heavily Botoxed facade of the high society matriarch shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She threw herself forward, completely ignoring the federal agents, and aggressively grabbed the railing of the sweeping glass staircase leading up to my balcony, looking up at me with wild, bloodshot, feral eyes. "Clara, please!" Patricia shrieked, her voice completely hoarse, her diamond necklace entirely askew as she clawed at the glass. "You can't do this. We are family. Blood is thicker than water, you vindictive, hateful woman. Tell them to stop. Tell them you authorized the loan. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. If he goes to federal prison, this entire family will be utterly destroyed." I slowly walked down the first 3 steps of the glass staircase, bringing myself just close enough so that my voice would carry perfectly to her, but keeping my physical distance from her chaotic, toxic energy. I looked at the woman who had spent half a decade drinking my wine, eating my food, and sleeping under a roof I secretly paid for, all while publicly mocking my lack of ambition and praising the son who was actively bleeding me dry. "Blood is nothing more than a biological coincidence, Patricia," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of any anger, possessing only the cold, unyielding weight of absolute truth. "You threw away a solid, unbreakable diamond because you foolishly, arrogantly thought it was cheap glass, and you chose to worship a fragile mirror because it perfectly reflected your own delusions." I paused, looking past her weeping form to where Richard was sitting on the floor holding his chest, and then back to the grand doors where Liam was being violently shoved into the back of a dark, federal SUV. "I did not destroy this family, Patricia. I simply removed myself as your foundation, and I allowed you to experience the exact mathematics of your own choices. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property before I have the county sheriff physically remove your belongings to the curb." I turned my back on her hysterical, screaming form, completely tuning out the chaotic panic noise of the ruined country club elite, scrambling to distance themselves from the Cole family name, and I walked slowly back up the stairs, moving gracefully toward the private, biometric-locked executive exit at the rear of the balcony, stepping out into the cool, dark, incredibly peaceful Manhattan night, leaving the burning wreckage of their false empire entirely behind me. The air outside the Magnolia estate tasted like absolute, unadulterated freedom, crisp and sharp against my skin as I walked away from the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles swarming the gravel driveway, leaving the chaotic, burning wreckage of the Cole family entirely behind me. I slid into the back of my waiting private car, the heavy tinted door shutting with a solid, expensive thud that instantly muted the distant, hysterical shrieking of my mother-in-law, sealing me in a quiet, leather-scented cocoon of pure sovereignty as the driver smoothly navigated away from the estate and merged onto the highway heading back toward the glittering Manhattan skyline. For 5 agonizing years, I had allowed my own brilliant, radiant light to be systematically dimmed, actively shrinking my intellect, hiding my vast financial empire, and swallowing my pride just to protect the incredibly fragile, glass-jawed ego of a man who ultimately viewed me as nothing more than a convenient, invisible stepping stone to his own manufactured greatness. As I watched the city lights blur past the window, I didn't feel the chaotic, fiery rush of petty revenge, nor did I feel the crushing, tearful sorrow of a broken marriage. Instead, I felt a profound, chilling equilibrium, the deep spiritual alignment of a woman who has finally set down a massive, crushing weight that was never actually hers to carry in the first place. Society constantly demands that women, particularly us, act as the unbreakable foundations for broken men, expecting us to quietly absorb their failures, finance their delusions, and endure their disrespect with a stoic, bleeding smile, all under the toxic guise of loyalty and holding the family together. But I was no longer interested in being the silent martyr for a man who would gladly sell my soul to buy his mistress a fake diamond. Before I share exactly what happened when Liam was forced to make his very first phone call from a federal detention center, let me know in the comments if you have ever reached that beautiful, terrifying breaking point where you finally stopped trying to save people who were actively determined to destroy you. When the car arrived at my Tribeca high-rise, I took the private elevator directly up to the penthouse, shedding my bespoke ivory suit and the heavy diamond earrings, leaving them neatly draped over a velvet chair before drawing a hot bath in my massive marble tub, letting the steaming, scented water completely wash away the lingering, stale energy of my former suburban prison. I slept that night with an absolute undisturbed peace, waking up the next morning not to the sound of Liam complaining about his credit cards, but to the soft, natural golden light flooding my bedroom and the quiet, comforting hum of my own secure, independent life. I dressed in a razor-sharp, minimalist charcoal blazer and sleek trousers, enjoying a single cup of premium espresso on my glass terrace overlooking the city before making my way down to the executive floors of Apex Resolution Partners. The atmosphere in the firm was absolutely electric, a quiet, disciplined buzz of pure victory radiating from my staff as I walked into my corner office, where Sterling and Sienna were already waiting by the conference table, reviewing a thick stack of federal arraignment documents. Sienna looked completely different from the woman who had stood on the stage the night before. Her hair was pulled into a severe professional chignon, her crimson gown replaced by a tailored navy suit, her eyes sharp and devoid of any lingering trace of the submissive mistress persona. "Good morning, CEO Caldwell," Sienna greeted smoothly, sliding a heavily redacted FBI field report across the mahogany desk toward me. The tactical raid was executed flawlessly. Liam was successfully processed at the Metropolitan Correctional Center at approximately 2 a.m, and because the fraudulently obtained funds crossed state lines into our holding accounts, the federal magistrate officially denied him bail as a high-level flight risk. I picked up the report, my eyes scanning the clinical black and white text, detailing the absolute collapse of his life, noting the specific charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and commercial embezzlement that carried a mandatory minimum of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. "Has he retained legal counsel?" I asked, my voice completely detached, treating my husband's incarceration with the exact same clinical objectivity I would use for any hostile corporate takeover. Sterling adjusted his glasses, a thin, deeply amused smile playing on his lips. He attempted to contact 3 top-tier criminal defense firms in the city this morning, but because Apex Holdings successfully froze all of his primary liquid assets, and because his parents' estate is now legally our property, he literally cannot afford the retainer fees for a private attorney. He is currently relying on a grossly overworked public defender who has already advised him to accept a full, unconditional plea deal. The absolute poetic justice of his situation was almost beautiful. Liam, the man who was obsessed with high society status, country club validation, and the illusion of limitless wealth, was now sitting in a concrete cell, entirely stripped of his designer suits, completely reliant on the very public assistance systems he and his elitist father had spent decades openly mocking at their dinner parties. Suddenly, my secure office phone, the private line reserved exclusively for emergency executive communications, began to ring, the sharp rhythmic sound cutting through the quiet satisfaction of the boardroom. I glanced at the caller ID, recognizing the institutional, automated prefix of the Federal Detention Center, and I reached out, slowly pressing the speaker button so both Sterling and Sienna could bear witness to the final pathetic remnants of his shattered ego. "This is a collect call from an inmate at the Metropolitan Correctional Center," the automated voice announced coldly. "To accept the charges, press 1. I pressed the button, leaning back in my leather chair, perfectly silent, waiting for him to speak into the vast, terrifying void he had created for himself. Clara, please tell me you're there." Liam's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding incredibly small, desperate, and completely stripped of the arrogant, commanding tone he had weaponized against me for 5 years. His words punctuated by the harsh, echoing sounds of slamming metal doors and shouting inmates in the background. "I am listening, Liam," I replied smoothly, my voice calm, level, and utterly devoid of the emotional hysteria he was undoubtedly praying for. "Clara, you have to fix this. You have to call your firm and tell them to drop the charges. Tell them the loan was a mutual marital decision. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you a full divorce. I will walk away with nothing. Just please get me out of here. I can't survive in this place," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob, entirely abandoning his pride as the terrifying reality of a 20-year sentence stared him directly in the face. I looked across the desk at Sienna, who simply arched a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow in silent disgust at his cowardice, before I leaned closer to the microphone. "I cannot drop federal charges, Liam," I explained slowly, using the exact same patient, patronizing tone he used to use when explaining basic finances to me. "The United States government is currently prosecuting you for forging my signature and committing wire fraud. I am simply the primary victim and the cooperating witness, and my firm legally owns the debt you foolishly defaulted on," he gasped, a wet, choking sound over the phone line. "But you're my wife, Clara. You took vows to support me. You can't just leave me in a cage while you sit in a penthouse you hid from me." I closed my eyes for a brief second, feeling the final lingering thread of my marital obligation dissolve completely into the ether. "You didn't see me as a wife, Liam. You saw me as an invisible bank account, a stepping stone, a pathetic safety net you could easily discard the second you thought you found a shinier, sharper woman to stand next to you," I stated, my voice dropping into a cold, devastatingly flat register. "You wanted an elite, high-stakes player who understood the ruthlessness of the corporate world, and you got exactly what you asked for. I am not your wife anymore. I am your absolute ruin." Before he could utter another pathetic, begging syllable, I reached out and disconnected the call, severing the line with a sharp, definitive click that echoed heavily in the quiet office, officially closing the book on Liam Cole forever. Sterling quietly gathered the arraignment papers, nodding respectfully. I will have the final divorce decree sent directly to his public defender this afternoon, boss. It includes a total waiver of all alimony and asset discovery, which he will be forced to sign immediately if he wants any hope of a lenient sentencing recommendation from our side. I nodded my approval, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. But my peace was suddenly interrupted by a rapid, urgent knock on the frosted glass door of my office. My executive assistant, a highly efficient woman named Elena, stepped into the room, her expression a mixture of professional concern and mild disbelief. "I apologize for the interruption, CEO Caldwell, but there is a woman causing a massive, highly disruptive scene in the main lobby downstairs," Elena reported, clutching her tablet tightly. "She is demanding to see the chief executive of Apex Holdings, claiming she has been illegally evicted from her generational estate, and she is threatening to call the press if we don't return her property deed immediately." I didn't need to ask for a name. The sheer, blinding entitlement radiating from the description was unmistakable, confirming that Patricia Cole, utterly stripped of her son's protection and facing absolute poverty, had desperately marched into the heart of my empire, demanding a miracle. I stood up, smoothing the sharp lines of my charcoal blazer, a cold, terrifyingly calm smile spreading across my face as I looked at the live security feed on my monitor, watching Patricia pace frantically across the imported Italian marble of my corporate lobby, screaming at my heavily armed security guards while clutching her cheap knockoff designer handbag. "Sterling, Sienna, please remain here," I instructed softly, stepping out from behind my massive desk, the soft click of my heels against the hardwood floor sounding like the steady, inevitable ticking of a countdown clock. I believe it is time I personally gave my former mother-in-law a comprehensive, highly educational tour of the exact data entry hobby she spent the last 5 years openly mocking. As I walked toward the private executive elevator, I felt no anger, only the chilling, absolute certainty of a queen descending from her throne to squash a final, irritating insect that had foolishly wandered into her pristine, heavily fortified castle, completely unaware of the absolute devastation waiting for her when those silver doors finally slid open. The silver doors of the private executive elevator slid open with a soft, barely audible chime, revealing the sprawling, sunlit expanse of the Apex Resolution Partners main lobby, a masterpiece of imported black Italian marble and brushed steel that projected absolute, intimidating financial authority. I stepped out, my bespoke charcoal blazer and sleek trousers moving with flawless precision, my aggressive stiletto heels clicking rhythmically against the polished stone floor as I approached the chaotic, unseemly disturbance near the front reception desk. Patricia Cole was standing there, looking utterly unrecognizable from the haughty, impeccably groomed country club matriarch who used to sip my vintage wine and casually insult my intelligence at Sunday dinners. Her hair was frantically disheveled, her silk blouse was heavily wrinkled, and she was aggressively waving a crumpled, official federal foreclosure notice in the face of my towering head of security, a former Navy SEAL named Marcus, who was currently looking at her with the mild, detached annoyance one might reserve for a buzzing mosquito. "I demand to speak to the chief executive officer of this predatory, fraudulent holding company immediately," Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the cavernous lobby, drawing the quiet, highly observant stares of several dozen junior analysts and high-net-worth clients who were waiting in the leather lounge chairs. "You have absolutely no legal right to seize a generational estate without offering a grace period. I know the mayor, I know the regional banking commissioner, and I will have this entire fraudulent operation shut down by tomorrow morning if someone doesn't bring me the CEO right this second." I did not rush. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of the frantic, chaotic energy she was currently radiating. I simply walked up behind her, maintaining a perfectly straight, regal posture, and let the sheer, heavy gravity of my presence settle over the immediate area until Marcus, the head of security, immediately stepped back, crossed his hands respectfully behind his back, and offered me a crisp, deferential nod. "Is there a problem here, Marcus?" I asked softly, my rich, calm baritone cutting effortlessly through Patricia's hysterical screaming, instantly silencing the immediate vicinity. Patricia froze, her shoulders stiffening violently at the sound of my voice, and she slowly, mechanically turned around, her bloodshot eyes widening in absolute, genuine shock as she took in the sight of her formerly invisible, supposedly penniless daughter-in-law, standing in the center of the corporate fortress. "Clara?" Patricia stammered, her jaw dropping slightly, completely unable to process why I was standing there looking like a master of the universe instead of weeping in a suburban kitchen. "What on earth are you doing here? Did you come to beg for a job to pay for Liam's defense attorneys? Tell these ridiculous, overgrown rent-a-cops to let me through to the executive suites. I need to fix the catastrophic mess your husband created." She actually reached out, aggressively attempting to grab my forearm to physically pull me along with her into her delusion. But Marcus smoothly stepped forward, his massive frame easily blocking her path, his voice dropping into a cold, authoritative warning. "Do not attempt to touch CEO Caldwell, ma'am, or I will be forced to physically restrain you and hand you over to the municipal police for criminal trespassing." Patricia's hand hovered in the air, trembling violently as the terrifying, impossible words finally registered in her frantic, heavily biased brain. She looked at Marcus, then looked back at me, her eyes darting over my flawless suit, the heavy gold heirloom watch on my wrist, and the absolute terrifying peace radiating from my face. "CEO? Caldwell?" she whispered, the color completely draining from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow, terrified ghost. You are the Apex Holding Company. You are the one who bought the distressed debt?" I offered a slow, clinical smile, gesturing gracefully toward the massive, brushed steel Apex logo mounted on the marble wall behind the reception desk. "Welcome to my data entry hobby, Patricia," I said quietly, using the exact condescending phrase she had weaponized against me for 5 long years. It turns out that working from the living room couch can be quite lucrative when you are secretly acquiring the defaulted assets of arrogant, insolvent families who finance their fake aristocratic lifestyles with stolen capital. She stumbled backward, her designer knockoff handbag slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud, her mind completely shattering as the true, horrifying reality of her situation finally took hold. Everything she had ever believed about me, that I was a slow, uneducated burden dragging her golden son down, was a complete, devastating lie, and the woman she had relentlessly abused was actually the invisible billionaire architect who held the absolute legal power to render her homeless. "You planned this," Patricia breathed heavily, shaking her head in frantic denial, tears of pure, impotent rage spilling over her cheeks. "You deliberately let Liam take that loan. You deliberately let him hang himself so you could steal my house, you malicious, vindictive sociopath." I felt no anger at her pathetic accusations, only a deep, profound exhaustion at her endless, bottomless lack of accountability. "I did not force your son to forge my signature on a federal banking document, Patricia, nor did I force him to wire stolen funds across state lines to a woman he believed was his mistress." I corrected her smoothly, my voice echoing clearly for the entire lobby to hear. "I simply stopped throwing my own hard-earned capital into the bottomless black hole of his ego. I stopped secretly paying your country club dues. I stopped secretly subsidizing the property taxes on your estate through the blind trust. I stopped being the invisible foundation that allowed you to pretend you were better than me." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest, genuinely unaware that I had been the anonymous benefactor, keeping her fragile social standing intact all those years. "You have exactly 29 days left to vacate the Magnolia estate," I continued, signaling to Marcus to conclude the interaction. "If you are not entirely off the premises by the 1st of the month, my legal team will execute the eviction notice, and the county sheriff will physically place your belongings on the curb. Do not ever return to this building." I turned my back on her before she could formulate another hysterical response, walking smoothly back to the private elevator as Marcus firmly gripped her elbow and began forcibly escorting her toward the revolving glass doors, her desperate shrieking pleas echoing faintly behind me until the heavy silver doors slid shut, sealing me back in my quiet, secure sanctuary. When I returned to my penthouse office, Sterling was waiting at my desk, holding a thick blue-backed legal folder that contained the absolute final culmination of my psychological liberation. The public defender just faxed over the signed documents from the detention center, CEO Caldwell, Sterling reported, a deep sense of professional satisfaction in his voice as he opened the folder to display Liam's frantic, messy signature on the bottom line. He initially tried to fight the total asset waiver, screaming that he was entitled to half of your corporate holdings. But the moment Sienna forwarded the second batch of federal embezzlement evidence to the prosecutor, his attorney strongly advised him that refusing the divorce terms would guarantee a maximum sentence. I picked up the heavy gold pen sitting on my desk and signed my name next to his, feeling an incredible weightless sensation instantly flood my entire body, as if a thick, suffocating iron collar had just been removed from my neck. File it immediately, Sterling, and ensure the asset protection locks are permanently sealed, I instructed, handing the folder back to him. That evening, instead of taking my private car back to the Tribeca high-rise, I decided to take the keys to my humble 10-year-old Honda Accord, pulling out of the secure VIP garage and merging onto the highway as the sun began to set, painting the massive city skyline in breathtaking shades of deep, violet, and bruised gold. I drove without a specific destination, rolling the windows down to let the cool, sharp evening air rush through the cabin, listening to the smooth, soulful voice of Anita Baker playing softly through the old speakers, entirely alone, but for the first time in 5 years, absolutely not lonely. Society consistently terrifies women with the prospect of loneliness, conditioning us to believe that sitting by ourselves in an empty house or a quiet car is the ultimate failure, a tragic punishment for not being accommodating enough, soft enough, or forgiving enough to the men who drain our spirits. But as I drove down the coastal highway, watching the city lights reflect off the dark water, I realized that true loneliness was not the absence of people. True loneliness was laying next to a man every single night who looked right through you, shrinking your own brilliance to fit into the tiny, fragile box of his insecurities. The silence in my car wasn't empty. It was expansive, a massive, peaceful canvas where I no longer had to constantly anticipate a crisis, manage a fragile ego, or decipher the passive-aggressive insults of a family that viewed me entirely as a transactional resource. I pulled over at a quiet scenic overlook, stepping out of the car and leaning against the hood, feeling the cool breeze against my face as I looked out over the vast, glittering expanse of the water, completely shedding the last lingering ghost of Clara, the dutiful, suffering wife, and fully breathing in the crisp, limitless air of the sovereign matriarch I had always been destined to become. Before I tell you about the final, devastating letter I received from Liam, let me know in the comments if you have ever found absolute, profound peace in a silence that other people warned you would be lonely. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled over the ruins of the Cole family legacy, and the final gavel had officially fallen in the federal courthouse downtown. I did not attend Liam's sentencing hearing. I had absolutely no desire to sit in a sterile wooden pew and watch a broken, terrified man weep in front of a judge, desperately begging for a leniency he had never once extended to me during our 5 years of marriage. Sterling attended in my place as the primary legal representative for Apex Holdings, and he returned to the penthouse office that afternoon with a crisp, finalized dossier and a profound look of professional satisfaction. Liam was sentenced to 7 years in a medium-security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of his assets, his arrogant country club status, and his entirely fabricated future. Patricia and Richard Cole were officially evicted from the Magnolia estate precisely on the 30th day. My security team reported that they had packed their remaining belongings into a rented moving truck in the dead of night, deeply ashamed and frantic to avoid the judging eyes of their former high society neighbors, ultimately relocating to a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a deeply unfashionable suburb 3 towns over. I didn't sell the estate to another wealthy family. Instead, I legally transferred the deed to the newly established philanthropic wing of Apex Resolution Partners, immediately hiring an army of contractors to completely gut the historic mansion and remodel it into a fully funded, state-of-the-art transitional housing and financial literacy center for women recovering from economic abuse and domestic trauma. It felt like the ultimate, poetic exorcism of the property, taking a house that had been built on toxic elitism, financial fraud, and patriarchal control, and physically transforming it into an impenetrable fortress of feminine independence and sovereign wealth. As for Sienna, she received a substantial, highly deserved executive bonus for her flawless undercover work, officially retiring the emerald slip dresses and the breathy, submissive voice forever, taking her rightful place as the Director of Corporate Intelligence at Apex, feared and deeply respected by every single analyst on the floor. My life settled into a beautiful, meticulously curated rhythm of absolute peace, completely devoid of the chaotic, draining energy of a man who constantly needed me to manage his fragile insecurities. I spent my mornings drinking premium espresso on my glass terrace overlooking the Manhattan sunrise, breathing in the crisp, unburdened air, no longer forced to wear faded cardigans or hide my brilliance behind the suffocating mask of the unremarkable housewife. One crisp, bright Tuesday morning, exactly 8 months after the gala, my executive assistant, Elena, walked into my office holding a standard plain white envelope stamped with the heavy, unmistakable institutional seal of the federal penitentiary system. She looked hesitant, holding it out with a protective, entirely professional distance, softly asking if I wanted her to immediately run it through the corporate shredder. I looked at the envelope, my name scrawled across the front in Liam's familiar, slightly erratic handwriting, and I felt absolutely nothing. No spike of adrenaline, no lingering sorrow, no petty curiosity, just the cold, detached observation of a woman looking at a useless artifact from a completely different lifetime. "Leave it, Elena. Thank you," I said smoothly, taking the letter and setting it off to the far side of my pristine mahogany desk while I finished reviewing a quarterly acquisition report. I let it sit there for 4 solid hours, entirely unbothered by its presence, before I finally picked up my solid gold letter opener and sliced through the cheap, recycled paper. The letter was exactly what I expected, a pathetic, rambling, densely written manifesto of a narcissist who was still completely incapable of genuine accountability. Liam wrote for 3 pages about how terrible the prison food was, how his cellmate disrespected him, and how his parents were severely struggling to adjust to their new, humiliating poverty. But buried deep in the 3rd paragraph was the true, venomous core of his delusion. He wrote that he forgave me for my vindictive overreaction, and that if I had only been softer, if I had only communicated my financial resources better, instead of hiding them like a deceitful sociopath, he never would have had to seek outside funding or younger companionship to build his empire. I read the words carefully, marveling at the sheer, breathtaking audacity of a man sitting in a concrete cage, wearing a federally mandated jumpsuit, earning 13 cents an hour in the prison laundry, still actively trying to gaslight the billionaire who legally owned the cage. He didn't write to apologize. He wrote to desperately extract one final drop of my emotional energy, hoping to spark a reaction, an argument, or even a hateful reply, because to a parasite, any attention is a lifeline. I didn't sigh, I didn't cry, and I didn't feel the sudden, chaotic urge to draft a brilliant, devastating response outlining his endless failures. I simply stood up, walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder humming quietly in the corner of my office, and dropped the letter into the grinding metal teeth, watching his final, pathetic words instantly turn into meaningless white ribbons. I turned back to my massive, floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, glittering expanse of Manhattan, a city that pulsed with energy, ambition, and limitless potential. I was 35 years old, at the absolute, undisputed pinnacle of my intellectual and financial power, entirely unburdened by the crushing, invisible weight of holding the family together at the absolute expense of my own soul. Society relentlessly tells women that if we stop sacrificing ourselves for the men who drain us, if we stop cooking their meals, protecting their fragile secrets, and financing their delusions, we will end up bitter, lonely, and unlovable. But as I stood there in my flawless, bespoke suit, feeling the warm, golden sunlight hit my face, I realized that my solitude was not a punishment. It was my ultimate, hard-won reward. I had spent my entire youth being a quiet, unbreakable foundation for a man who only wanted to trample me to reach the top. But the moment I legally, cleanly, and ruthlessly withdrew that foundation, his entire fabricated castle turned to dust, while I remained entirely intact. I walked out of my office, the soft, rhythmic click of my stiletto heels echoing with absolute, unapologetic authority against the hardwood floor, ready to conquer the rest of my beautiful, undisturbed life. Liam was a prisoner of his own arrogance. His parents were prisoners of their lost status, and the fraudulent world they had tried to build on my broken back had been permanently foreclosed. True power does not scream, it does not throw tantrums, and it does not beg to be seen or respected. It simply observes, it calculates, and it waits for the exact perfect moment to gracefully walk away, leaving the parasites to starve in the absolute silence.